Okay, so today we're diving into a conflict that did way more than just redraw maps. It actually redefined modern warfare. It's an incredible story of resistance, of mountains, and of a superpower that was, well, brought to a dead stop. So picture this. It's the winter of 1979, the last few weeks of the year. And across this rugged, snow-covered land, something is about to happen that's going to change the world in a way almost nobody saw coming. But yeah, we're not talking about a weather storm here. No, this was a storm of politics, of war, a conflict that would just explode with this unbelievable intensity, and pretty soon it was pulling in countries from all over the world. A storm of fire that would burn for 10 long years. Just think about that for a second. A whole decade of fighting. This wasn't some quick battle. It would go on to shape the future of not just Afghanistan, but the Soviet Union itself. And honestly, it left scars that you can still see today. So, how did this all kick off? Right, let's go back to that very first night, the moment this whole storm just broke right over the capital, Kabul. I mean, just try to imagine what that was like. The quiet of a winter night, and then suddenly, boom! It's just shattered by the roar of helicopter gunships overhead and the rumble of tanks rolling through the streets. This wasn't some faraway fight on a border. This was a full-blown invasion, happening right in the heart of the country. And for the people of Kabul, watching this all unfold from their windows, it was just absolute shock. They were confused, they were terrified, and they were completely, utterly unprepared for the sight of a superpower's army taking over their city. But an invasion like this, it never goes unanswered. Out in the mountains, in the valleys, far from the city lights, a response was already starting to bubble up. And that brings us to the rise of the resistance. They were called the Mujahideen. And that name is really important. It doesn't just mean fighters. It actually translates to those who struggle. And that tells you everything, doesn't it? It speaks to a cause, a deep, powerful motivation that was about so much more than just winning one fight. So who were these people? Well, they weren't some professional, trained army, not at all. They were the very fabric of Afghan society. We're talking about farmers, imams, students, shepherds, just ordinary people, really, who were driven to do something truly extraordinary. And look, they didn't have tanks or jets. So what did they have? An ingenious strategy. They turned the land itself into their greatest weapon. The mountains, these huge, unforgiving mountains, they became their allies. The narrow passes, the hidden caves, this whole landscape became a fortress that the Soviet army, with all its power, just couldn't conquer. So what you end up with is this classic David and Goliath situation, what we call an asymmetrical conflict. And to really get it, you gotta look at the stark difference between the two sides. And wow, this comparison really says it all, doesn't it? You got the Soviet army with its modern tanks, trained soldiers, and deadly airstrikes, and on the other side, the Mujahideen with old rifles, but they had an unbreakable will and, of course, the mountains as their allies. It's the perfect picture of an asymmetrical fight, where you have these wildly different levels of power and tech going head-to-head. But that imbalance, well, it wasn't gonna last forever. See, the world started paying attention. The struggle of the Mujahideen caught fire globally, and suddenly support started flowing in, especially from places like the United States and Pakistan. And that aid, particularly the arrival of Stinger missiles, the shoulder-fired rockets that could take down Soviet helicopters, that was an absolute game changer. It turned this resistance movement into a full-blown proxy war of the Cold War. But here's the thing about war. Victory, however you define it, always comes with a cost. And in Afghanistan, that cost was just unbelievably high. We're talking about millions of people. Just let that number sink in. Not thousands, not even hundreds of thousands, millions. Millions of people forced to leave their homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries like Pakistan and Iran. I mean, this was one of the biggest, most tragic refugee crises of the entire 20th century. A third of the country's population was displaced. It's staggering. And you can't just measure a cost like that in numbers. It's so much more personal. It's in the villages that were just wiped off the map. It's in the families that were torn apart forever. And it's in an entire generation of kids who grew up knowing nothing but war, where the sound of gunfire was just a normal part of life. Honestly, there's maybe no better way to say it than this simple, powerful phrase: Afghanistan bled. The entire nation was wounded, and so deeply. So,
After years of this brutal, bloody stalemate, the tide finally started to turn. Which brings up a huge question, right? How does a war that feels like it will never end actually end? Well, by the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was just getting hammered. They were facing huge economic problems at home, and the number of casualties was just staggering. They finally had to face a harsh reality. This war was unwinnable. The price, both in lives and in money, was just too high to keep paying. And so in 1989, they started to pull out.
And of course, the end of the war looked totally different depending on where you were standing. For Russia, it was a withdrawal, a strategic retreat. But for the people of Afghanistan, it was this incredibly complicated feeling, a bittersweet victory. A moment of unbelievable pride, sure, but one that was soaked in just profound tragedy and loss. So the last soldier leaves, the last tank rolls back across the bridge. But the story is far from over. The shadows cast by this war would stretch on for decades, shaping the future of the region and the world in ways nobody could have predicted back then. And when you boil it all down, that's really the heart of this story. It's just a stunning testament to resilience. You have this small nation with mountains as old as time itself, and it stood up to a global superpower and simply refused to kneel. And that leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. The fighting stops, right? The soldiers go home. But what about everything else? The consequences, the trauma, the political chaos, the memories, all of that endures. So when a war finally ends, do its shadows ever really, truly leave?